Do you sell sugar? The bell above the door hadn't even stopped ringing when the little girl said it, her voice soft but steady in a way that didn't belong to a child standing alone in a convenience store at 11:42 p.m., and I remember thinking two things at once. She was too calm, and I knew that sentence didn't mean what it sounded like. I was halfway through signing a receipt, pen hovering over the paper, when my hand stopped moving, because that phrase, those exact words, hadn't been used in years, not since a time I had buried under suits, contracts, and silence, not since I decided I was done being the man people called when something had already gone wrong. I looked up slowly, like I had all the time in the world, but everything inside me had already shifted into place. And there she was, maybe 6 years old, small enough that her sneakers barely made a sound on the tile floor, blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail that was coming undone, blue eyes locked on mine like she had been told exactly who to find and what to say when she found him. The cashier didn't notice anything strange, just kept scanning items, the hum of the refrigerator units filling the space, country music playing low through old speakers. But the air between me and that girl felt different, like something invisible had just been triggered, something that didn't belong in a place that sold soda and lottery tickets. I set the pen down carefully, slower than I needed to, buying myself a second to think, but the truth was I didn't need time. I already knew what it meant. Codes like that don't get used unless there's no other option. Codes like that mean someone taught her what to say because they couldn't be there to say it themselves. I stepped toward her, not too fast, not enough to draw attention, just enough to close the distance, and when I crouched down to her level, I kept my voice low, controlled, the way you talk when you don't want to scare something already on edge. "What kind of sugar are you looking for?" I asked, because that was the response, the only response that mattered, and her lips parted slightly, like she had been waiting for that exact question, like everything. Depended on whether I answered correctly. "The kind that helps when it's not safe to go home," she said, and that was it. That was the confirmation, the line that turned a strange moment into something real, something immediate, something I couldn't ignore even if I wanted to, which I didn't. I felt it then, that quiet shift inside my chest, the one I hadn't felt in a long time, the one that meant I wasn't walking away. I glanced at the glass door behind her, at the empty parking lot beyond it, at the flicker of a streetlight casting long shadows across the asphalt, and I didn't see anyone obvious, no movement, no sign of trouble. But trouble like this doesn't announce itself. It waits, it watches, it gets closer while you're still deciding what to do. "Where's your mom?" I asked gently, and for the first time, her composure cracked just enough for me to see it. The fear she had been holding back, the way her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. "She told me to find you," she whispered, and that was the moment everything locked into place. Because this wasn't random, this wasn't luck, this was deliberate. Someone had chosen me, out of all the people in this city, to be the one who answered that code, and whether I liked it or not, that meant one thing. Whatever was coming next, I was already part of it. I did not ask another question right away because questions make children think they have a choice, and she did not have one. Not tonight. Not with the way her voice had lowered when she said it was not safe to go home. So instead I stood up slowly and reached for my phone, not to call anyone yet, just to press a single button that would tell my people to pay attention, to look without being seen, to find what was already moving toward us before it got close enough to matter. "What is your name?" I asked, keeping my tone even, like this was normal, like she had just walked in for candy and not for something that had already set a chain of events in motion. "Lily," she said, her eyes flicking once toward the door behind me, and that small movement told me more than any explanation could have, because children do not look at exits unless they are thinking about them. "Okay, Lily," I said, nodding like we were agreeing on something simple, something ordinary. "We're going to get you something to drink first." I reached into the cooler and grabbed a bottle of water, twisting the cap open before handing it to her, giving her hands something to do, something steady, because fear shows up in the small things, in the way fingers shake, in the way breath comes too fast, and she needed something to anchor her while I figured out how deep this went. She took it with both hands, nodding without speaking, and I could see she was trying very hard to be brave, the kind of effort that does not belong to a child unless someone has taught them what happens when they are not. My phone buzzed once in my palm, silent to anyone else, and I glanced down just long enough to read the message. Nothing obvious outside. One vehicle idling 2 blocks away, tinted windows, engine running longer than it should. That was enough. It always starts like that, something that looks like nothing until you know what you were looking for. I turned slightly, so my body blocked Lily from the door, not in a way that would scare her, just enough to make it natural, like I was standing between her and the cold air outside, and I lowered my voice again. "Where did your mom tell you to go after you found me?" I asked, and this time she hesitated, her lips pressing together like she was trying to remember the exact words, not just the meaning, because whoever sent her had been careful, had made sure she would not forget. "She said you would know what to do," Lily whispered, and that landed heavier than anything else she had said so far, because it meant the person who taught her that code knew me, or knew of me, or at least knew enough to trust that I would not ignore it, and that narrowed things down in a way I did not like. I exhaled slowly, not letting any of that show on my face, because panic spreads fast, especially in small rooms, and I needed her calm if I was going to keep control of this. "She is right," I said simply, and I meant it, even if I had not decided yet exactly how far I was willing to go. I tapped my phone again, this time sending a direct instruction, short and precise. "Find the mother, now, and do not lose her," and within seconds the confirmation came back, a location ping lighting up on my screen, less than a mile away, moving, not fast, but not still either. I looked down at Lily, at the way she was watching me like everything depended on what I did next, and I felt that same shift again, stronger this time. The one that meant I had already made the decision even if I had not said it out loud. "We are going for a short drive," I told her, offering my hand, palm open, giving her the choice to take it, because control matters, especially when everything else feels like it is slipping away. She looked at my hand for half a second, then placed her small fingers in mine without hesitation, and that trust, quiet and absolute, sealed it in a way nothing else could have, because now it was not just a situation, not just a code from a past I had tried to forget, it was a promise I had not made but still had to keep. I did not rush once we stepped outside because rushing draws attention, and attention was the one thing we could not afford, not with a child beside me and a situation that had already proven it knew how to hide in plain sight. So I kept my pace steady, guiding Lily toward the black sedan parked under the flickering streetlight at the edge of the lot, its engine already running even though I had not given that order out loud, because the people who worked for me understood silence better than most people understood words. The night air was colder than it should have been for late spring, the kind of chill that settles into your bones when something feels off, and I felt Lily's fingers tighten slightly around mine as we walked, not pulling back, not hesitating, just holding on a little firmer, like she was bracing for something she could not see yet. I opened the rear door and helped her inside, making sure she was seated before closing it gently. Then I circled around to the front without looking back, because if anyone was watching, they would already know where my attention was, and I did not need to confirm it for them. The driver did not speak when I got in, just nodded once, eyes forward, waiting for direction, but my phone buzzed again before I could say anything. The location pinged shifting, moving faster now, turning onto a main road less than half a mile away, and that told me everything I needed to know without a single word being exchanged. "Follow this," I said, turning the screen slightly so he could see the route, and the car eased forward into the empty street like it had been waiting for that exact command. In the back seat, Lily stayed quiet, and that silence was louder than anything she could have said, because children fill space when they feel safe. They ask questions, they look around, but she did none of that. She just sat there, hands folded around the bottle of water I had given her, eyes fixed on the window as if she was trying to recognize something in the passing lights. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror and softened my voice just enough to reach her without breaking the calm I was trying to maintain. "You are doing exactly what you were supposed to do," I told her, and she nodded once, small and deliberate, like she had heard those words before, like someone had practiced this moment with her more than once. The city blurred past in familiar patterns, streetlights, closed storefronts, the occasional late-night diner still glowing under fluorescent lights, but none of it registered the way it normally would, because every part of my attention was locked on that moving dot on my screen, on the way it slowed, then sped up again, like whoever we were tracking was not sure where to go or how long they had before it was too late. Another message came through. This one from a different number, a voice I trusted without question. Visual confirmed, female, mid-20s, alone, looking over her shoulder, and I felt something shift again, sharper this time, more focused, because now she was real, not just an idea behind a code, not just a possibility, but a person moving through the same streets as us, close enough that timing was going to matter. We are close, I said quietly, not to the driver, not even fully to Lily, but more to myself, like saying it out loud would make it easier to control what happened next. The car slowed as we approached an intersection, the traffic light casting a red glow across the windshield, and for a brief second everything felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see which direction this would go. And then I saw her, just ahead on the sidewalk, moving quickly but not running, her head turning just enough to show the tension in her shoulders. The kind that comes from knowing you are not alone, even when you cannot prove it. I did not need anyone to tell me it was her. I already knew, because Lily's voice, barely above a whisper, confirmed it before I could say a word. "That is my mom," she said, and the way she said it, steady but fragile at the edges, told me one more thing I could not ignore, one more truth that settled into place whether I wanted it to or not. Whatever had started this, whatever had forced a child to walk into a stranger's world and speak a code that should have stayed buried, it was not over yet. It was just beginning. I told the driver to keep moving for 3 more seconds, even though every instinct in my body was already shifting toward action, because timing matters more than speed, and if we stopped too soon, too obviously, anyone watching would know exactly why. So we rolled past her once, just enough for me to see her clearly under the streetlight, the way her jacket hung slightly open like she had left in a hurry, the way her eyes scanned every passing car without ever lingering too long, like she was trying not to look afraid, even though fear was written into the tension of her shoulders. "Turn around," I said quietly, and the car eased through the intersection, making a smooth, controlled loop that brought us back to the curb about 20 feet ahead of her, not blocking her path, not forcing her to stop, just placing us in a position where she would have to notice us without feeling trapped by it. In the back seat, Lily leaned forward, her small hand pressing lightly against the glass, and I caught her reflection in the mirror again, that same mix of relief and uncertainty flickering across her face like she did not know what would happen next, but needed it to happen anyway. I opened my door before the car fully stopped, stepping out into the cool air with the kind of calm that comes from knowing hesitation would only make things worse, and I did not call out to her right away, because names carry weight, and I needed to be sure before I used one. She slowed when she saw me, not stopping completely, just enough to register that I was standing there, that I was looking directly at her, and I watched the moment recognition did not come, the moment her mind tried to place me and failed, and that was expected, because this was not about who I was, it was about what I represented without her knowing it yet. "Emily," I said finally, my voice steady, not loud, just enough to reach her without drawing the attention of anyone else on the street. And that was when she stopped completely, her entire body going still in a way that told me I had just crossed a line she did not think anyone else could cross. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, but in calculation, the kind that comes from someone who has been thinking 3 steps ahead for longer than they should have had to. "How do you know my name?" she asked, and there it was, the first layer of resistance, not panic, not relief, just a question that carried more meaning than the words themselves. I did not answer it right away, because answers can wait, but timing cannot. So instead I stepped slightly to the side and opened the rear door of the car just enough for her to see inside, just enough for Lily to lean forward and meet her gaze. Everything changed in that second. The tension, the distance, the doubt, it all collapsed into something immediate and undeniable, because nothing cuts through uncertainty like seeing the person you were trying to protect standing exactly where you hoped they would be. "Mom," Lily said softly, and that one word carried more weight than anything I could have explained, more urgency than any argument I could have made. Emily moved forward without thinking, closing the distance between us in 2 quick steps, her attention fully on Lily now, her hand reaching out as if she needed to confirm she was really there, really safe, really not alone anymore. "Lily, are you okay?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with something fragile underneath, something she was holding back by force, and Lily nodded immediately, glancing at me for half a second before looking back at her mother. "He helped me," she said, simple and direct, and I felt Emily's attention shift back to me just as quickly, sharper this time, more focused, because now I was no longer just a stranger who knew her name. I was someone her daughter had trusted, and that changed the equation whether she liked it or not. I met her gaze without stepping closer, without pushing, giving her the space to decide how she wanted to react. Because control is not about taking, it is about offering just enough that the other person realizes they do not have better options. "We do not have much time," I said, keeping my voice low, even, grounded in something she could recognize as real. "And whatever made her come find me is still out there." I watched the way that landed, the way her jaw tightened slightly, the way her eyes flicked once down the street behind her, confirming what she already knew but did not want to say out loud. And that was all I needed. "Get in the car," I added, not as an order, not yet, but as a statement of fact, because sometimes the truth is the only thing that sounds like a command, and for a long second, she did not move, caught between instinct and logic, between running and staying, until Lily's hand found hers, small fingers wrapping around her wrist with quiet certainty, and in that moment, the decision was no longer just hers to make. She did not move right away, and I respected that, because hesitation is not weakness when you are responsible for someone else. It is calculation, it is survival, and I could see it happening behind her eyes as she looked from Lily to me and back again, weighing risks she did not fully understand but felt deeply enough to take seriously. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice lower now, tighter, like she was trying to keep control of something that was already slipping, and I could have answered that question in a dozen different ways, none of them useful to her in this moment, none of them changing what needed to happen next. "Someone your daughter was told to find," I said instead, because that was the only part that mattered, the only truth she could verify without trusting me, and I saw it land, not as comfort, but as something she could not easily dismiss. Lily's hand tightened around her wrist again, a silent insistence that carried more weight than anything I could add, and that was when Emily exhaled slowly, like she was letting go of a decision she had already made before she admitted it to herself. She nodded once, small but decisive, and guided Lily into the back seat before following her in, her movements quick but controlled, like she was still expecting to change her mind at the last second. I closed the door behind them and slid back into the front seat without looking at the driver, because he already knew what came next, and the car pulled away from the curb with the same quiet precision it had arrived with, blending into the empty street as if we had never stopped there at all. Inside the car, the silence shifted, heavier now, filled with questions that had not been asked yet, and I let it sit for a moment, because sometimes silence gives people just enough space to realize they are already safe, or at least safer than they were a minute ago. "You should not have come to me," Emily said finally, her voice steady but edged with something sharper, something that sounded like regret wrapped around relief, and I almost smiled at that, because it told me she understood more than she wanted to admit. "You did not come to me," I replied, glancing at her through the mirror. She did. And that distinction mattered, whether she accepted it or not. Lily leaned slightly against her, the tension in her small frame easing just enough to show she felt the difference, and Emily's hand moved automatically to her shoulder, protective, grounding, like she was reminding herself what this was really about. "They were at the apartment," she said after a second, her gaze dropping briefly, before lifting again, stronger now, more focused, not inside, but close enough that I could not risk staying, and I could not call anyone without making it worse. She paused, studying my reflection like she was trying to read something I was not showing, and then she added, quieter this time. So I told her what to say. That confirmed it. Not just the code, not just the intention, but the level of desperation behind it, because you do not teach a child something like that unless you believe it might be the only option left. I nodded once, processing it without reacting, because what she was describing was not unfamiliar, just inconvenient in a way that required precision. "You made the right call," I said, and I meant it, even if she did not believe me yet, even if she never would, because outcomes do not depend on belief, they depend on timing, and right now, we still had that on our side. My phone buzzed again, another update, another piece of the picture coming into focus, and I read it without turning the screen, my expression unchanged even as the details sharpened into something less abstract and more immediate. The car slowed slightly as we turned onto a quieter street, the kind that does not show up on maps unless you know where to look, and I leaned back just enough to signal a shift, not in direction, but in intent. For now, you stay with me, I said, not asking, not negotiating, just stating what was already becoming reality. And when Emily's eyes met mine in the mirror again, I saw the resistance still there, still strong, but no longer dominant, because something else had taken its place, something quieter but harder to ignore. Understanding, not of who I was, not yet, but of what I had already become to her the moment Lily said those words out loud. The car did not stop where people would expect it to stop, not at a hotel, not at a house with lights on and neighbors watching, but somewhere quieter, somewhere that did not ask questions, and I felt the shift in Emily the moment she realized we were leaving the familiar parts of the city behind. The way her posture straightened slightly, alert again, calculating again, like she was reminding herself that safety and control are not always the same thing. Lily had leaned her head against her shoulder by then, not asleep, but close enough that her breathing had slowed, the tension easing in small, careful increments, and that told me more than anything else that we had bought time, not solved anything, just created space where there had been none. "Where are you taking us?" Emily asked, her voice calm but firm, not confrontational, just direct, the way people speak when they want answers but already know they might not get them. I let a second pass before responding, not to delay, but to choose the version of the truth that mattered right now. "Somewhere no one is looking," I said, and that was enough for the moment, not because she trusted me, but because she understood the logic behind it. The car turned down a narrow street lined with older buildings, the kind that blend into the background during the day and disappear completely at night, and we pulled into a private garage that closed behind us before the engine fully stopped, sealing us off from the outside world in a way that felt final without being threatening. I stepped out first, moving around to open the back door, giving Emily the choice again, not forcing, just waiting, and she hesitated for half a second before stepping out, guiding Lily with her, her eyes scanning the space automatically, noting exits, distances, anything that might matter later. Good. That kind of awareness keeps people alive. "Upstairs," I said, gesturing toward the elevator at the far end, and she followed without arguing, because at this point, movement was safer than standing still. The ride up was quiet, the kind of silence that is not empty, but full of unspoken questions, and I let it stay that way until the doors opened into a space that did not match the outside at all. Clean lines, soft lighting, everything controlled, everything deliberate. Lily looked around first, curiosity breaking through the exhaustion for a moment, and that small shift eased something in the room without anyone acknowledging it. Emily did not relax, not fully, but I saw the tension adjust, redirect, like she was reassessing the situation with new information she had not expected. "You can rest here," I said, stepping back just enough to make it clear I was not closing the space in on them. "No one comes in without me knowing." She studied me for a long second, searching for something she could use, something she could trust or reject, and then she nodded once, not agreement, not surrender, just acceptance of the current reality. "This is not random," she said quietly, her voice lower now that Lily was starting to drift closer to sleep. She did not just remember that phrase out of nowhere. I met her gaze evenly, because she was right, and denying it would only make things worse later. "No," I said, she did not. The weight of that settled between us, not heavy, but undeniable, and for the first time since she stepped into the car, I saw something else in her expression, something beneath the fear and the caution, something that looked like the beginning of a question she was not sure she wanted answered. "Then you already know who taught it to me," she said, and that was not a question, not really, just a statement wrapped in uncertainty, and I held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary before answering, because this was where things started to change, not outside, not in the car, but here, where distance no longer protected either of us from the truth. "I know enough," I said quietly, and that was when Lily's voice, soft and half asleep, broke the tension just enough to remind us what mattered most. "Mom, we are safe now, right?" she murmured, and Emily's hand immediately found hers, instinct overriding everything else as she smoothed a strand of hair from Lily's face. Yes, she whispered back, her voice gentler now, steadier in a way that had not been there before, and I watched that moment carefully, because it was not just reassurance, it was a decision, one she was making in real time, one that placed them here, with me, whether she fully accepted it yet or not. And as I turned slightly toward the window, looking out at a city that no longer felt as distant as it had an hour ago, one thing became clear in a way it had not been before. This was no longer about a code or a coincidence. It was about something that had already chosen its direction, and I was no longer standing outside of it. Emily did not sit down right away, even after Lily settled onto the couch, her small body finally giving in to exhaustion, her fingers still loosely wrapped around her mother's sleeve like she needed that connection even in sleep, and I watched the way Emily stayed standing for a moment longer than necessary, her eyes moving through the room again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if she was memorizing everything, not because she planned to stay, but because she needed to understand where she was before she allowed herself to breathe. "You said you know enough," she said quietly, her voice lower now, careful not to wake Lily, but steady in a way that told me she was no longer asking out of fear. She was asking because she needed the truth, or at least the part of it I was willing to give. I leaned slightly against the edge of the table, keeping the distance between us the same, not closing it, not increasing it, because balance matters when trust does not exist yet. "The code was not something people just pass around," I said, choosing each word with intention. "It was used by a very small group, for very specific situations, and it was never meant to last this long." Her expression shifted at that, not dramatically, just enough for me to see recognition forming behind her eyes, like pieces she had been holding onto without context were finally starting to connect. "Then you knew him," she said, and this time it was not a question at all. It was a conclusion, one she had already reached before I confirmed it. I held her gaze for a second, then nodded once, because denying it would serve no purpose now. "I did," I said simply, and the weight of that past settled between us without needing to be explained in detail. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping just a fraction, not in relief, but in understanding, the kind that comes when something complicated suddenly becomes clear in the worst possible way. "He told me if anything ever happened, if I could not reach him, I should teach her that phrase," she said, glancing down at Lily for a moment before looking back at me. I did not think I would ever have to use it. There was no accusation in her voice, no blame, just a quiet acknowledgement of how far things had gone, and I respected that more than anything else she could have said. My phone buzzed again, pulling my attention for just a second, and I read the update without reacting. But it confirmed what I had already suspected, that the situation outside had not resolved itself just because we had stepped away from it. "They are still looking," I said, keeping my tone even, because panic would not help either of them. "But they are not sure where to look yet." Emily's jaw tightened slightly, her instincts catching up with the reality I had just stated, and she crossed her arms loosely, not defensive, just grounding herself in something physical. "And when they figure it out?" she asked, her eyes locking onto mine again, not afraid, just direct, demanding honesty. I did not hesitate this time, because hesitation creates doubt, and doubt spreads quickly. "They will not get close enough to matter," I said, and that was not a promise I made lightly, not something I said to reassure her without meaning it. It was a fact, one I intended to enforce in every way necessary. She studied me for a long moment after that, searching for something, measuring the weight of my words against everything she had experienced in the last few hours, and I could see the shift happening again, subtle but real, the moment where resistance starts to turn into reluctant acceptance, not because she trusted me, but because she understood that right now, there was no better option. Lily stirred slightly on the couch, her fingers tightening for a second before relaxing again, and Emily's attention flicked back to her immediately, instinct overriding everything else once more. She moved closer, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders, her hand lingering there just a second longer than necessary, like she was drawing strength from the simple act of keeping her safe. I watched that quietly, because moments like that reveal more than any conversation ever could, and when Emily straightened again, turning back toward me, there was something different in her expression, not softer, not weaker, but clearer, more focused, like she had made a decision she was not ready to say out loud yet. "Then we stay," she said finally, her voice calm, controlled, and that was not a request, not a question, it was a statement, one that acknowledged the reality we were both standing in, and I nodded once in response, because that was all that was needed, the understanding already in place without anything else being said. And as the room settled into a quieter kind of stillness, one thing became certain in a way it had not been before. This was no longer just about keeping them safe for a night. It was about something that had already begun to take shape, something neither of us had planned, but neither of us could walk away from anymore. I did not leave the room right away because leaving creates distance, and distance, at this point, would only slow things down, so I stayed where I was, watching the way Emily adjusted to the space not as a guest, but as someone already thinking 3 moves ahead, someone who understood that safety is temporary unless it is maintained, and that awareness told me more about her than anything she had said so far. Lily shifted again on the couch, her breathing deep and even now, the kind of sleep that comes after too much adrenaline and not enough certainty, and Emily's gaze lingered on her for a moment before returning to me, sharper this time, more intentional, like she had decided to stop reacting and start asking the questions that actually mattered. "Why would he trust you with something like that?" she asked, her voice low but steady, and I could hear the weight behind it. Not curiosity, but a need to understand the connection she had just stepped into without warning. I considered the question for a second, not because I did not have an answer, but because answers like that are never simple, and the wrong version of the truth can do more harm than silence. Because I was there before he needed to say it out loud, I said finally, keeping it direct, giving her just enough to understand without opening doors that did not need to be opened yet. She studied me closely. After that, not looking away, not backing down, just measuring the distance between what I said and what I was not saying, and I respected that, because most people either trust too quickly or not at all, and she was doing neither. My phone buzzed again, more insistently this time, and I stepped slightly to the side to take the call, not leaving the room, just lowering my voice enough to keep the conversation contained. "Talk," I said, and the response came immediately, controlled but faster than usual, the kind of pace that signals a shift in the situation without needing to spell it out. I listened without interrupting, my expression unchanged even as the details aligned into something more urgent, more immediate than before, and when the call ended, I did not put the phone away right away, because the weight of what I had just heard needed a second to settle into something actionable. Emily noticed that pause, of course she did, and she stepped closer, not too close, just enough to make it clear she was not going to wait for me to decide what to share. "What changed?" she asked, and this time there was no hesitation in her tone, just clarity, like she had already accepted that whatever was happening involved her whether she wanted it or not. I met her gaze again, steady, direct, because uncertainty at this point would only make things worse. "They found your apartment empty," I said, keeping my voice even, "and now they know you left with a plan." She exhaled slowly, her shoulders tightening for a brief second before settling again, not surprised, not panicked, just confirming what she had already suspected. "So they will start looking wider," she said, more to herself than to me, and I nodded once in agreement. "They already have," I replied, and that was the part that mattered, not what they might do, but what they were already doing. Lily stirred again, murmuring softly in her sleep, and Emily's attention flicked back to her instantly, her hand resting lightly on her shoulder until she settled again, and I watched that moment carefully, because it grounded everything else. It reminded both of us what this was really about. When Emily looked back at me, there was no hesitation left, no uncertainty in the way she held my gaze, just a quiet resolve that had not been there before. "Then tell me what to do," she said, not asking for permission, not asking for reassurance, just stating a need in the clearest possible way. And for the first time since this started, I allowed myself to step closer, not enough to invade her space, but enough to make the shift clear. "You stay here tonight," I said, my voice lower now, more deliberate. "And tomorrow, we move before they understand where to look next." She nodded once, accepting it without argument, because at this point, options were not something either of us had in abundance, and as the room settled into a quieter kind of tension, one thing became undeniable in a way it had not been before. This was no longer just about responding to a code or protecting them from a moment of danger. It was about staying ahead of something that was already adjusting, already learning, and the margin for error was getting smaller with every passing minute. I did not sleep that night, not because I could not, but because sleep requires a level of distance that I no longer had. And as the city outside settled into that quiet stretch between midnight and morning, I stood by the window watching lights flicker on and off in buildings across the street, patterns I had memorized years ago when this kind of vigilance was routine instead of occasional. Behind me, the room stayed still, the kind of stillness that only comes when exhaustion finally wins, and I could hear the soft rhythm of Lily's breathing from the couch, steady, unguarded, the way it should have been hours earlier if things had gone differently. Emily had not gone far from her, choosing the chair closest to the couch instead of the bed in the other room. Her posture relaxed just enough to suggest rest, but not enough to suggest she had truly let her guard down, and I respected that, because people who survive situations like this do not switch off. They adjust, they wait, they listen. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed again, a short update this time. Nothing urgent, just confirmation that movement outside had slowed, that the search had widened but not sharpened, and that bought us something valuable, not safety, but time, and sometimes that is the only difference that matters. I turned slightly, glancing back at them, and that was when I noticed Emily's eyes open, not startled, not confused, just aware, like she had been resting but not sleeping, tracking the room even with her eyes closed. "You do not stop, do you?" she said quietly, her voice rough from fatigue but steady, and I shook my head once, a small movement that did not need explanation. "Not when it matters," I replied, and she held my gaze for a second before looking back at Lily, her hand resting lightly on her shoulder again, grounding herself in the same way she had all night. "He used to do that," she said after a moment, her voice softer now, almost distant. "Stay up, watch everything, like he could keep things from happening just by being aware of them." I did not respond right away, because there are things you do not compare, not out loud, not when the person making the comparison has not decided what it means yet. "It does not stop things," I said finally, "but it makes you ready when they start." And she nodded slightly, like she already knew that, like she had seen it play out before in ways she had not fully understood at the time. Morning came slowly, the light shifting from dark to gray to something softer that filtered through the windows without asking permission. And with it came a change in the room, not dramatic, just enough to signal that the next part had already begun whether we were ready or not. Lily stirred first, her eyes opening slowly, confusion flickering for half a second before recognition settled in. And then she looked at her mother, then at me, and something like relief replaced the uncertainty. "We stayed," she said quietly, like she was confirming something important, and Emily brushed a hand through her hair gently, a small smile touching her expression for the first time since this started. "We stayed," she echoed, and I watched that exchange carefully, because it marked a shift that could not be undone, not just physically, but emotionally, the moment where a temporary decision begins to feel permanent. I stepped away from the window then, picking up my phone as another message came through, this one more direct, more immediate, and I read it once before looking back at them, the weight of what came next already settling into place. "We move in 30 minutes, I said, my voice calm but firm, leaving no room for hesitation, and Emily did not argue, did not question it this time. She just nodded once, already reaching for Lily's jacket, already transitioning from stillness to action without needing anything else from me. As I turned toward the door, giving them space to prepare, one thought stayed with me in a way it had not before, clear and unavoidable, something that had been building since the moment that code was spoken but had only now fully taken shape. She did not just find me because she needed help. She found me because somewhere along the line, someone had decided I was the only one who would not walk away, and whether I liked that or not, it meant one thing I could not ignore anymore. Not now, not. After everything that had already been set in motion, I was not just part of this situation, I was the reason it was going to end differently.